So something happened recently in Japan that I felt that was very interesting when comparing what Bandai Namco is up to, and if they don't adjust, they could be tanking their sales and their company performance going forward. But before we continue, we are giving away a Nintendo Switch 2 at 140,000 subscribers or on September 1st, whichever comes first. Subscribe, like, comment. The winner will be chosen at random, and it's a worldwide giveaway. Thanks, peeps. So over on Twitter, Stealth had this post saying, Echoes of Aincrad Sword Art Online sold 16,092 physical units in Japan at launch. Late port of Digimon Story Time Stranger sold 15,644 on the Nintendo Switch 2, and that's a game keycard, and another 11,251 units on the Nintendo Switch 1. That's actually full on cart, but there is a free upgrade. So if you buy the Switch 1 version, you can free upgrade it to the Switch 2 version if you're playing on there. Something for Bandai Namco to think about as they regularly skip Nintendo platforms at launch. So what Stealth is trying to say here is that, what are you guys doing? You skipped the Nintendo Switch 2 and went with Xbox and PlayStation and PC for a big Sword Art Online game, and you ultimately ended up getting burned because you got outsold by an old port of Digimon across the Switch 1 and the Switch 2. Now, yes, much bigger install base with Digimon with Switch 1 and Switch 2, but it is a old game, multiple months old. I mean, it came out last year, I think in October for the PlayStation 5, so it's more than a half year old at this point, and you would expect a brand new Sword Art Online game to have a lot more than 25,000 units or so. It's Sword Art Online. From what I understand, and I have to look up the numbers completely, but this is the lowest or one of the lowest debuts ever for a Sword Art Online game. These titles usually do better at launch, and this one just seems to have tanked. Now, it didn't get the best reviews from what I saw. I don't know how Japanese media was looking at the game. I just know here in the West didn't get the best reviews. I'm not sure how it's selling here. I haven't seen it on the Amazon or anything like that. Like, I'm not sure how well it's doing, but these are the type of games that maybe at launch aren't going to do too great because of the price tag, but then later down the line, as they get price discounts, they'll do better. So I do think that this game, maybe some of the Sword Art Online fans are waiting for those price drops for this game, but from what I understand, Sword Art Online games usually do better. But what Stealth is saying here is like, wait a minute, you guys are skipping the Nintendo Switch 2 and you're getting outsold by old ports. Now, Digimon probably is, I would say, I don't know if it's more popular when it comes to the overall in Japan or anything, but I do think the game is better. So that could have played a part into it. People were kind of waiting for a portable version of Digimon. I mean, it just lends itself to being a portable game. It's a monster tamer style of game. It's really long, got a lot of content, so it just lends itself to that. But I do think that Sword Art Online games shouldn't be outsold in the debut by an old port of Digimon. So that's something that Bandai Namco absolutely has to think about. Now, if you look at some of the other Japanese developers out there, with Falcom, for example, they've essentially switched over to lead development platform on the Nintendo Switch 2, and they kind of made that transition before the Switch 2 even came out. It was the launch year with Trails in the Sky First Chapter. That was first announced on the Nintendo Switch 1. They showed Switch 1 footage, and then that game was put out on other platforms to great success. I think it runs at 120 FPS on the PlayStation 5, maybe even 4K. I know it runs in super high resolution, runs in really great FPS because they took the Switch 1 game and just upscaled it. Yes, you don't get all the fancy graphics and all of that, but Trails in the Sky, when it comes to the sales numbers, kind of blew away what Sword Art Online did here. So if you're looking at what you need to do to make sure that your game does well business-wise, is put on multiple platforms so it can have a successful launch, so you can continue paying the developers and continue having more games in the series, then they need to really take a look at that. I agree with what Stealth is saying here, and Bandai Namco has been accused many times, not even accused, they are guilty of waiting to put out games on the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, there is another factor for that. Switch 2 came out in the middle of all the development cycles. It is not going to be the easiest thing to all of a sudden get a dev kit in the middle of development when you're already hard at work on these games and somehow get a Switch 2 version out, because it is ARM, it is different, it's not the same as PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series and all of a sudden get a great version of that game out and have it ready to go at launch. That's not going to happen. I do think sometimes gamers trivialize development. They think that it's super easy just because another developer was able to get that done. That means every developer is going to be able to just somehow put together a Switch 2 port of a game on different architecture and make sure that it's good. So we have to have a little bit of grace there because it's not easy to do that. Now, if the Switch 2 was somehow an x86 platform like PlayStation and Xbox, I think you probably see that a bit more, but it's not. They're developing on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. Those are all similar types of architecture with PC, x86, Switch 2, ARM, different architecture, different APIs, obviously NVIDIA, not AMD. So it's a very different style of development, very different type of thing that you have to do. Although there are similar processes, it's not just pressing a button that all of a sudden here comes a Digimon port, or pressing a button and here comes a Sword Art Online port. So just keep that in mind, guys. I do think that Bandai Namco does need to do a better job and get ports out quicker, but at the same time, I don't think it's just going to be a quick one press button fix all. I do think that time could fix this too, as the more developers get the Switch 2 dev kits and get familiar with them and get new games in development, we will see more games that are day and date going forward. Now, in the next 2 or 3 years, we shouldn't see anything when it comes to a lot of these games that are coming out. Bandai Namco, I'm giving you your grace period again, probably for the rest of this year, maybe even a little bit into next year. But after that, there really shouldn't be any ports that come out like a year later or like 6 to 8 months later or something like that. They really should be more on time. Now, they could be strategically placing some of these games, but I do think that you are losing out on sales by doing that. If the new Sword Art Online game was right there on the Nintendo Switch 2 at launch, you're probably selling another 15 to 30K, and over the course of time, to capitalize on those launch sales, you're probably selling another tens of thousands of units that you're not going to maybe get if you wait. So I think that's the dangerous thing when it comes to Bandai Namco, and to where maybe they are kind of killing the momentum for their own games. And this is kind of a follow-up, even though it's been a long time now, that they're kind of hurting their own games. I made this years ago. I talked about how they're killing their own games when it comes to certain aspects of them and not getting them out on Switch 1 fast enough and having late ports. And it seems like that's kind of carried over to the Switch 2. Now, once again, we're going to have to wait for them to really get kind of caught up. Bandai Namco is a very different type of publisher because they contract out so many different development studios to work on the games. They don't have a bunch of in-house studios working on games all the time. They contract out stuff. So I think a lot of these other developers probably aren't too familiar with Nintendo Switch 2 development or even Switch 1 development with some of these titles. So I think that's also causing some problems. But once again, we will see kind of how it all works out with Bandai Namco going forward in the future, because Digimon Story Time Stranger, that game sold 26,895 units on the Nintendo Switch 1 and 2 combined, and that's compared to the 23,779 units that it sold at launch. So we're comparing the first launch week of Switch 1 and Switch 2 compared to the PlayStation 5. So that right there tells you that it had just as big of a launch. So there is an appetite for these games right there to have them day and date, and you probably would have bigger sales than what you have right now at this point. Now, you also have to look at it too, guys. The Switch 2 is set to even go bigger this year. Yes, there is a price increase that Japan has already gotten, so they feel that price increase. The Switch 2 did a ton of units right before that price increase. I think it was like April or May-ish when that price increase was happening. But right before the price increase, man, like 1 million people or something like that bought the Switch 2 in Japan. People were scrambling, and then it kind of dipped afterwards because the people that were going to buy the Switch 2 within the next number of months just hurry up and bought it right then and there. But now it's kind of back on the rise a bit, getting upwards of the mid to high 20K plus range. And Splatoon Raiders is coming out. You also have Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, that's coming out, Nintendo Switch Sports Resort, and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Remake. Those are all games that are popular in Japan and should boost sales considerably. Now, the Switch 2 is coming up on the total sales lifetime to date of the PlayStation 5. I think it's around 7 to 8 million or so with PlayStation 5 if you combine all of the systems that they have, whereas the Nintendo Switch 2 is over 6 million units, and it's only been about a year and some odd months. So that's the big thing here when it comes to the Switch 2. It's fastly approaching that PlayStation 5, so you have to start planning accordingly in order to really maximize what you're going to do over the course of the generation, or you're going to lose out on probably millions of dollars if you're not planning things right with the Switch 2 and getting your games when it comes to day and date as close as possible with the Switch 2 and how it's selling in Japan. Because once again, these sales are kind of telling when you're looking at a brand new Sword Art Online game compared to an older port of a Digimon game. So Bandai Namco, get something together there. And once again, the install base should rapidly expand this year because you have a lot of games that the Japanese audience does truly enjoy with what I mentioned here. I do think that Echoes of Aincrad Sword Art Online, if I'm saying that correctly, I do think it's going to come to the Switch 2. All of the previous most recent Sword Art Online games ended up coming to the Switch 1 in later or older ports, so I do expect it to come over. I don't know how well it's going to do because once again, I don't know how good the game is. Based on some of the reviews here, it's not so great, but we don't know how Japanese gamers are feeling on that, so I do expect it to do okay, but not great so far when it comes to the first debut sales. There could be more digital sales that are tracked here. More people are buying digital PlayStation 5s in Japan than physical, so a lot of people that maybe have a PlayStation 5 that are looking forward to this game probably bought it digital, but we're also not counting digital sales with Digimon or anything else. This is all just physical charts that we're going over for the Famitsu in Japan. And there still is a lot of people in Japan that have a disc drive. That's still the best selling model of the PlayStation 5 in Japan, is the disc drive model. So people do have it. So I would expect just maybe a little bit more to show up for a big Sword Art Online game right there at launch. But once again, we will see going forward in the future how well it does. Now, one more thing that I want to hit on is that if you look at some of the Japanese market right now, like, and even just worldwide, things are quite volatile. Like, one little misstep when it comes to what you're doing with your game, or when it comes to the marketing, or even when it comes to planning, can really spell doom for many games out there. And it kind of sucks. It's a scary time if you're just looking at things. Look at what happened with Microsoft and the implosion of a lot of their studios, the gutting of id, the gutting of certain development studios, to the point to where a lot of them are wondering what's going on here. What are we going to do for our next game? Games getting canceled, development studios and layers of management getting completely collapsed. There's all sorts of craziness. Now, Japan doesn't have that level, although they have a lot of their own issues. But I'm excited to see what the impact of the Nintendo Switch 2 can be for a lot of these other JRPGs that are coming, because I do think that it's going to have a very positive influence over a number of years when it comes to like the Legend of Heroes, or when it comes to some of the AA stuff that we've been getting. I think that the Switch 2 is really going to supply a great place for these type of games and actually make it to where it sells more than what we saw with the Switch 1 or what we saw with PlayStation 4 or systems in the past. Switch 2 kind of blends that nicer, higher quality system, but also has it to where you have that portability too. So it's a better quality than like a Switch 1, but then it also has a bit more power to where you can get better, I would say, performance with some of these AA games and not experience like, you know, the 30 FPS that we saw with Trails in the Sky, First Chapter, or some of this stuff. So I think that's exciting for a lot of these RPGs that are coming out. And Bandai Namco, you gotta get on top of this. You gotta fix this. Otherwise, there could be some pretty big problems for you in the future. But what do you think about everything that we discussed here? How do you feel about Bandai Namco in the future when it comes to Switch 2 and how it could change things? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, peeps, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch 2 RPG content and more right here on screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you for the next one. Peace.